Imagine holding in your hand a simple coin, one that might seem ordinary at first glance. A coin that has passed through countless hands, paid for coffee, newspapers, gasoline, and groceries. A coin that represents not just commerce, but also history, culture, and the evolution of American coinage. This coin is the 1980 Jefferson nickel, a piece of money that tells us far more than its 5-cent value could ever suggest. The Jefferson nickel has been in circulation since 1938, and the year 1980 stands as a fascinating chapter in its long journey to understand the story of this coin. We need to go back to the vision behind it, the man it honors, the design that made it iconic, and the time in which the 1980 issues were struck. Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, was not only the author of the Declaration of Independence, but also a visionary thinker, farmer-scientist, and advocate of liberty. His influence on the young republic was so profound that by the 1930s, the United States Mint sought to honor him on a coin. The nickel was chosen, and beginning in 1938, Jefferson replaced the buffalo nickel design that had graced American coinage for a quarter century. The sculptor Felix Schlag designed the Jefferson nickel, presenting Jefferson's portrait on the obverse and his beloved home Monticello on the reverse. By the time we reached 1980, the Jefferson nickel had already been a familiar sight in pockets for over 4 decades. The world had changed since. Its first minting America had seen the Second World War, the Cold War, the Civil Rights Movement, the space race, and the rise of modern technology. Yet through all those years, the Jefferson nickel remained constant as a symbol of stability and tradition. The 1980 issues are particularly interesting because they represent an era in American coinage defined by the challenges of inflation, the modernization of minting technology, and the sheer scale of production that coins required to meet the demands of a growing population. The 1980 Jefferson nickel was struck at 3 major U.S. mints: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. Philadelphia coins in 1980 carried no mint mark. As was the custom at the time, Denver nickels bore the D mint mark, while San Francisco produced proof issues with the S mint mark. The Philadelphia Mint was the oldest and largest facility producing vast numbers of nickels for circulation, and in 1980, the Philadelphia nickel became one of the most common coins of the decade. The Denver Mint also struck millions, and these coins circulated heavily across the western United States. San Francisco, meanwhile, produced proof nickels in smaller numbers meant not for general commerce, but for collectors and numismatists who valued sharp detailed strikes and mirrored finishes. The 1980 Jefferson nickel weighs 5 grams and is composed of a copper-nickel alloy, 75% copper and 25% nickel. This composition had been standard since 1946 following the end of the wartime silver alloy issues from 1942 to 1945. The diameter is 21.2 millimeters. The edge plane without reading. The obverse bears Jefferson's left-facing portrait, and the reverse shows Monticello with the inscriptions E pluribus unum, Monticello 5 cents, United States of America, and Jefferson's name appearing on the obverse alongside the national motto, In God We Trust. The year 1980 itself holds significance in American history. It was a time of political transition, with the election of Ronald Reagan marking a shift in the nation's direction. It was a year of economic struggle. Inflation was high. The energy crisis weighed heavily on American families, and the cost of everyday goods was rising. Yet amidst these struggles, the nickel still served as a workhorse of commerce. Every diner vending, machine bus fare box, and cash register had nickels moving through them, millions upon millions each day. The Jefferson nickel was truly the backbone of small change transactions. From a numismatic perspective, the 1980 nickel offers fascinating insights. Collectors examine differences between the Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco strikes. They study die varieties, small imperfections or differences in design details that can turn an ordinary coin into a rare and valuable collectible. For example, strong strikes where Jefferson's hair details are fully visible and Monticello's steps appear sharp and clear, are prized by collectors, especially from the proof issues. These full-step nickels, as they are called, can fetch significant premiums on the market because they demonstrate an exceptional quality of strike that is often lacking in circulation pieces. The production of the 1980 nickel also reveals the technical sophistication of the U.S. Mint. By this time, minting technology had advanced to ensure faster production with higher quality control. Yet despite improvements, the sheer scale of coinage meant imperfections and varieties inevitably slipped through, creating a field of study for dedicated numismatists who catalog every doubling of a letter, every slight misalignment, and every unusual mark that distinguishes one nickel from another in a sea of millions. But the story of the 1980 Jefferson nickel is not just technical, it is also cultural, because when we think about coins, we think about how they connect people across time. A 1980 nickel minted in Philadelphia might have been given as change at a movie theater where someone bought a ticket to watch The Empire Strikes Back, or perhaps used by a child buying candy at a corner store. Maybe a Denver nickel passed through countless toll booths on western highways, or a proof nickel sat safely in a collector's album protected from circulation, waiting to be admired. Decades later, each coin carries with it the human experiences of the time it was struck, and the society it served. Collectors today look back on the 1980 Jefferson nickel with both nostalgia and appreciation. It represents the enduring presence of Jefferson in American coinage. It represents a year of political change and economic challenge. It represents the artistry of Felix Schlag, whose design remained largely unaltered for decades, and it represents the Mint's ability to produce billions of coins that keep the American economy running smoothly, though its face value is only 5 cents. The 1980 nickel embodies layers of history that make it worth far more in memory than in money. As we trace its journey, we realize that the Jefferson nickel is not just a coin, it is a piece of America's story, a reminder of Jefferson's vision, a record of the Mint's craftsmanship, a tool of everyday life, and a collectible that continues to fascinate hobbyists around the world, from its copper-nickel composition to its sharp Monticello. Reverse from its Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco origins to the hands it passed through on its way across America. The 1980 Jefferson nickel is a small object with a large tale, and that tale is one we continue to tell every time we hold it in our hands. Imagine holding in your hand a small piece of American history, a coin that has survived decades of change from the aftermath of the Second World War through the Cold War civil rights struggles and modern digital transformations, and yet it remains a silent witness to all of it. This is not just a nickel, it is the Jefferson nickel of 1946, and it tells a story far greater than its 5-cent face value. Collectors, historians, and everyday Americans may look at this coin as ordinary. But when you dig deep into its design, production, and historical context, you realize this coin represents resilience, transition, and national identity. The Jefferson nickel had been first introduced in 1938, replacing the Buffalo nickel, and was designed by sculptor Felix Schlag, who won the design competition. Schlag's portrait of Thomas Jefferson, facing left with a dignified expression, was chosen to symbolize America's third president, author of the Declaration of Independence, and a key architect of democratic ideals. The reverse depicted Jefferson's Monticello estate, with its neoclassical architecture standing as a monument to Jefferson's vision of liberty and enlightenment. Thinking by 1946, the Jefferson nickel had already endured a crucial change during World War II when the United States altered the composition of the coin to preserve nickel metal for the war effort from mid-1942 to 1945. Nickels contained an alloy of copper, silver, and manganese, rather than the traditional copper-nickel blend. These were known as war nickels, and they carried a distinctive large mint mark above Monticello to indicate the change. When the war ended in 1945, the United States faced the monumental task of transitioning from wartime production to peacetime industry factories that had once built tanks and planes returned to producing consumer goods. Soldiers returned home, and America entered an era of optimism yet uncertainty. The 1946 Jefferson nickel became the first year in which the coin returned to its original pre-war composition of 75% copper and 25% nickel. It was both a return to normalcy and a marker of post-war recovery. The Philadelphia Mint, the Denver Mint, and the San Francisco Mint all struck 1946 nickels, with mintages in the hundreds of millions reflecting a growing economy and the need for circulating coinage to support the post-war boom. The Philadelphia Mint struck the highest mintage at over 161 million pieces. The Denver Mint produced around 45 million, while San Francisco added nearly 14 million, making the S-Mint coins the scarcest of the three in circulation at the time. Collectors today note that while the 1946 nickel is common in lower circulated grades, high-grade uncirculated examples with full steps, details on Monticello are far more elusive. This is due to the quality of striking during the period where weak strikes often plagued Jefferson nickels. Full steps designations are especially prized by collectors and can command significant premiums. The year 1946 itself adds to the historical weight of this coin. America was emerging as a global superpower. The United Nations had just been founded in 1945, and the United States was leading post-war reconstruction. Under the Marshall Plan domestically, the GI Bill was helping returning veterans pursue education and buy homes. Suburbanization was beginning, and the American economy was shifting toward consumer prosperity. In this context, the Jefferson nickel circulated in the pockets of citizens buying groceries, paying bus fares, and fueling the everyday lives of Americans who were stepping into a new chapter of national life. From a design perspective, the coin remained unchanged, with Jefferson's profile on the obverse and Monticello on the reverse. Yet it carried symbolic importance. Jefferson's legacy as a champion of liberty was highlighted in a time when America was positioning itself as the leader of the free world, in contrast to the growing tensions with the Soviet Union that would soon escalate into the Cold War. The nickel's metallic return from silver wartime alloy to copper-nickel blend also symbolized peace, stability, and economic normalcy. Once again, Americans could handle a nickel that looked and felt like the ones before the war for collectors. The 1946 Jefferson nickel represents a pivotal transitional issue. It is not rare in the sense of low mintage, but its historical positioning as the first peacetime nickel after the war makes it significant. The San Francisco Mint issues are scarcer and more challenging to find in higher grades, which adds collecting interest, while error varieties, such as repunched mint marks or doubled dies, though not extremely common, do exist and provide specialists with unique challenges and rewards in building sets. To fully appreciate the 1946 nickel, one must also place it in the broader timeline of the Jefferson nickel series. The early years from 1938 to 1941 saw the introduction and establishment of Schlag's design. Then the war years from 1942 to 1945 introduced the silver alloy nickels, which have always fascinated collectors for their wartime context. Then 1946 marked the return to the classic alloy and symbolized the nation's shift to peacetime. By the late 1940s and into the 1950s, Jefferson nickels would continue to circulate widely, becoming one of the most familiar and stable denominations in American coinage history, beyond numismatics. The 1946 nickel tells us about the psychology of a nation. Coins are daily objects handled by millions, yet they capture the mood of their time. In 1946, the nation was filled with optimism and rebuilding energy. The soldiers were back, industries were booming, and coins like the Jefferson nickel were the currency of this prosperity. Each one circulated in countless hands, buying newspapers, ice cream sodas, streetcar tickets, and small luxuries that symbolized the return of peace. In the decades Since the 1946 nickel has become a staple of collections, especially for those building complete Jefferson nickel sets from 1938 onward, its value in circulated condition remains modest, but in uncirculated condition with sharp details and lustrous surfaces, it can fetch strong prices. Registry set collectors especially seek out coins with full steps designations, as these demonstrate the pinnacle of quality and strike precision from an era when such coins were not easy to produce. When you look closely at a 1946 Jefferson nickel, you see more than metal. You see the transition from war to peace, from scarcity to abundance, from uncertainty to optimism. You see the image of Thomas Jefferson, whose ideals continued to inspire a post-war America charting its destiny on the world stage. You see Monticello standing firm like the Republic itself, resilient after global conflict, and you see the craftsmanship of the United States Mint, resuming traditional practices after years of extraordinary wartime measures. This coin, therefore, is not merely a 5-cent piece. It is a bridge in American history, a marker of return, a symbol of stability, and a tangible reminder of 1946, a year when the world was being reshaped and the United States was stepping into a new role on the global stage. It continues to fascinate collectors, historians, and storytellers alike, making it one of the most interesting issues in the Jefferson Nickel series. Imagine holding in your hand a coin that was born in the aftermath of World War II. A coin that reflects not only the economic recovery of the United States, but also the enduring legacy of one of its most important founding fathers, the 1948 Jefferson. Nickel is more than just a small piece of metal. It is a window into American history, design artistry, and the progress of the minting process in the mid-20th century. When we begin the journey of understanding the 1948 Jefferson nickel, must first travel back to its origins. The Jefferson nickel was first introduced in 1938, replacing the Buffalo nickel, and it carried with it a new image of Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, on the obverse, and Jefferson's Monticello home on the reverse, sculpted by Felix Schlag. The design was intended to reflect both the ideals of democracy and the architectural beauty that Jefferson so passionately loved. By 1948, the Jefferson nickel had already been in circulation for a decade, but this particular year holds unique importance in the broader context of numismatics and American history. To understand the significance of the 1948 Jefferson nickel, we must examine the political and economic climate of the late 1940s. The United States was transitioning from wartime production to a booming post-war economy. The coinage system reflected stability as the country entered into a new era of prosperity and expansion. The nickel itself was made of its traditional copper-nickel alloy, composed of 75% copper and 25% nickel. Unlike the wartime nickels of 1942 to 1945 that contained silver, the return to the copper-nickel alloy signaled normalcy after years of global conflict. For collectors and historians, the 1948 issue represents that shift back to peace and consistency. The Philadelphia Mint, the Denver Mint, and the San Francisco Mint were all responsible for producing Jefferson nickels in 1948, and each mint mark tells its own story. Philadelphia coins bore no mint mark. Denver coins bore a small D, and San Francisco coins bore an S mint mark, found to the right of Monticello on the reverse. The mintage numbers were substantial, with the Philadelphia Mint producing over 89 million nickels, the Denver Mint producing nearly 45 million, and the San Francisco Mint striking about 11 million. While these numbers suggest that the 1948 nickel is not particularly rare in terms of overall survival, condition rarity tells a different tale, finding high-grade examples with sharp details. Full steps on Monticello and pristine luster is a true challenge, and it is these finer points that drive collector interest. The artistry of the Jefferson nickel deserves deeper attention. Felix Schlag's original design was modified slightly over time, with Monticello's details often appearing weak or flat on circulation strikes. Collectors of Jefferson nickels often focus on the full steps designation, a grading detail that indicates the steps leading up to Monticello are fully visible without wear or flattening. In 1948, this becomes especially important because production quality at the mints, varied coins from Philadelphia often exhibit softer strikes compared to Denver issues, while San Francisco pieces frequently show weaker details, making high-quality San Francisco coins particularly desirable among specialists. The story of the 1948 Jefferson nickel also cannot be separated from the cultural landscape of America during that year. 1948 was a time of political contest, as President Harry S. Truman won a surprising re-election. The Cold War was beginning to shape international relations. The Marshall Plan was actively rebuilding. Europe and domestically the United States was solidifying its identity as a post-war power. Against this backdrop, ordinary Americans carried 1948 nickels in their pockets, using them in everyday transactions at grocery stores, gas stations, diners, and movie theaters. The nickel became a silent companion to the daily lives of millions, embodying both Jefferson's vision and America's forward momentum. Condition, rarity, and grading standards make up another chapter in this coin's long history. Collectors today prize examples of the 1948 nickel in mint state condition. Those certified by professional grading services like PCGS and NGC often command premiums, especially when designated with full steps. A top-quality 1948 Jefferson nickel with full steps can transform an otherwise common date into a true prize within a registry set. In fact, registry set competition has elevated the status of even seemingly ordinary dates like 1948, as collectors seek perfection in every slot of their Jefferson nickel collections. Errors and varieties add another fascinating dimension. The 1948 Jefferson nickel is known for several die variations and minting anomalies, including repunched mint marks, doubled dies, and strike-through errors. Though not as dramatic as some other dates, these varieties capture the attention of advanced collectors, each one a reminder of the imperfections of the minting process and the human element behind machine-struck coinage. Studying these varieties gives us a glimpse into the technical side of mint production in the late 1940s, where dies wore out or were hand-punched with mint marks, creating subtle differences that have become treasures for specialists today. From a historical standpoint, the Jefferson nickel also reflects Jefferson's legacy as a thinker and statesman. Jefferson was not just a president, he was an author of the Declaration of Independence, a founder of the University of Virginia, an advocate for liberty and learning. His portrait on the coin is not just decorative. It is symbolic of the ideals of freedom, democracy, and architecture as an art of civilization. Monticello itself stands as a monument to Jefferson's intellect and vision, and in 1948, every coin that bore his home reminded Americans of that enduring legacy. For 2 full hours, one could explore the many branches of this coin's story, from minting techniques to historical parallels, from collector markets to cultural meaning. The 1948 Jefferson nickel is more than a simple piece of currency. It is a bridge between past and present, a tangible artifact of post-war America, and a continuing subject of fascination for numismatists around the world, whether tucked away in a collection certified in a holder or still occasionally found in circulation. The coin carries with it 75 years of history, artistry, and the enduring image of a man who helped shape a nation. Imagine holding a small piece of history in your hand, a coin that may seem ordinary, but carries with it decades of economic stories, minting evolution, and historical value. This is the story of the 1983 Jefferson nickel, a coin that on the surface looks like any other nickel in your pocket. But when you look deeper into its creation, its background, and its impact on numismatics, you begin to see how much more there is beneath its metal surface. The Jefferson nickel series had already been in circulation for nearly half a century when the 1983 issue was struck, and the design that was introduced in 1938, featuring the profile of President Thomas Jefferson on the obverse and his Virginia home Monticello on the reverse, was still the same design crafted by Felix Schlag, though modifications were made throughout the decades to refine details. This 1983 nickel represents a continuation of one of the longest-running coin designs in United States history, and yet its timing is particularly important to collectors and historians because it was minted during a period of economic transition in the United States. The early 1980s were marked by high inflation shifts in monetary policy and changing approaches by the Federal Reserve, and the mint itself during this time, coinage production reflected both economic demand and technical capabilities. The 1983 nickel was struck at the Philadelphia and Denver mints, with no proof nickels issued in San Francisco that year, because from 1980 to 1983, the mint did not strike official proof sets. Instead, they issued special souvenir sets, which has made nickels of these years distinctive in the eyes of collectors. The Philadelphia Mint struck over 561 million nickels in 1983, while the Denver Mint struck over 536 million, giving the coin a massive mintage overall. Yet because of heavy circulation and the fact that most people did not save these coins in pristine condition, high-grade examples are still considered relatively scarce. To understand the 1983 Jefferson nickel more deeply, we need to trace the nickel back to its origins in 1938, when the U.S. Mint decided to replace the Buffalo nickel after 25 years in circulation. The new design was required by law to feature Thomas Jefferson and Monticello. The design by Felix Schlag was chosen after a public competition. But even then, the mint required Schlag to make adjustments, particularly to the lettering and layout of Monticello. The resulting designs stayed with only minor changes for decades. The nickel became a staple of U.S. coinage, representing both the Jefferson legacy and the endurance of American coin designs through wartime and peacetime alike. By the time the 1983 coin was struck, the Jefferson nickel had already survived the wartime alloy changes of World War II, when silver replaced nickel due to wartime demands, and it had become familiar to multiple generations of Americans. The year 1983 itself is crucial because the mint had not issued mint sets from 1982 to 1983, a decision based on budget constraints and shifting policies. This absence of official sets has made uncirculated examples of 1983 nickels harder to locate and highly valued by collectors, since most available pieces come from circulation where wear and tear was inevitable. Even though millions were minted, the number of high-quality coins saved is relatively small, making gem examples certified by grading companies such as PCGS or NGC more desirable and commanding. Strong premiums on the collector market. The Philadelphia struck coins carry no mint mark, while the Denver mint nickels carry the D mint mark positioned to the right of Monticello on the reverse. From a numismatic perspective, the 1983 nickel represents a case study in how mintage numbers alone do not dictate rarity, but rather survival in high grades. Many collectors often assume that with over 1 billion combined mintage, the coin is common. But when it comes to mint state 66 and higher, the survival rates drop significantly, and that is where the true challenge and appeal for serious Jefferson nickel collectors lies. The coin also holds interest because it falls into what numismatists call the modern coinage era, a period often overlooked by casual collectors, but deeply studied by specialists who appreciate the nuances of strike-quality die varieties and minting history. When examining varieties of the 1983 Jefferson nickel, specialists look for strike differences, particularly between Philadelphia and Denver issues, as well as die deterioration and mint errors. During this time, the U.S. Mint was working with massive production demands, and die wear was common, leading to weak strikes, especially on Monticello's steps. Collectors often look for well-defined full steps on the reverse as a benchmark of quality, and these full-step nickels are considerably harder to locate in gem condition from 1983, making them stand out dramatically in value compared to ordinary strikes errors. From the 1983 Jefferson nickel also play a fascinating role in the history of this coin. Struck through debris off-center strikes and double dies occasionally make their way into the hands of collectors, and such pieces highlight both the imperfection and artistry of minting at high-volume levels. Error collecting in modern coins has grown into a significant subfield of numismatics, and the 1983 nickel provides examples that continue to intrigue researchers and hobbyists. From a broader historical angle, the Jefferson nickel of 1983 reflects the stability of U.S. coinage at a time when inflation and global economics were fluctuating. Other denominations, such as the penny, were facing debates over rising production costs, but the nickel maintained its composition of 75% copper and 25% nickel, a metallic mix that had remained unchanged since 1866. Except during wartime adjustments, the durability of this composition not only gave the coin its unique color and feel, but also made it practical for commerce in an era that was shifting rapidly toward electronic payments. Looking at the legacy of the 1983 Jefferson nickel, it may not at first seem like a standout issue, yet for the numismatist, its story is one of scarcity within abundance, of economic significance within a small metal disc, and of design continuity within a changing nation. When collectors today seek to build complete sets of Jefferson nickels, they inevitably encounter the challenge of finding high-quality 1982 and 1983 examples, because of the absence of official mint sets during those years. Thus, these coins have achieved a special place in modern collecting circles. The 1983 nickel tells a story that ties together American history, monetary policy, the artistry of Felix Schlag, and the dedication of collectors who continue to preserve these pieces for future generations. So when you look at a 1983 Jefferson nickel in your pocket change or in a dealer's case, remember, you are not just looking at an everyday coin, you are looking at a piece of history minted at a time when America was grappling with economic shifts, when the mint itself was changing policies, and when a coin series that had already lasted nearly 50 years was quietly continuing its journey, a journey that still resonates with collectors today, who understand that even the most common-appearing coins can carry stories of rarity, challenge, and deep historical meaning. Imagine holding a coin that seems ordinary at first glance, yet behind its worn nickel surface, it carries decades of American history and tells a story of economics, politics, artistry, and change. The 1988 Jefferson nickel may look like just another piece of pocket change. But if we dive deep into its origins, its design, its minting process, its role in commerce, and the fascinating events of the era that produced it, we begin to see how much more than money this small coin really is. Welcome to this journey, where we take you into the world of the Jefferson nickel and unlock the hidden story of the 1988 issue, a coin that represents not only the continuation of a classic American design, but also the financial and cultural landscape of the United States in the late 20th century. The Jefferson nickel was first introduced in 1938, replacing the Buffalo nickel after a design competition that aimed to honor Thomas Jefferson, the third President of the United States and author of the Declaration of Independence. Felix Schlag, the German-American sculptor, won the contest with a portrait of Jefferson on the obverse and Monticello Jefferson's Virginia home on the reverse. This design remained largely unchanged for decades, and by the time the 1988 Jefferson nickel was struck, the coin was already 50 years into circulation and firmly established as a symbol of American coinage. The year 1988 itself was an important one in American history. Ronald Reagan was serving his final year as president. The Cold War was winding down. The American economy was expanding, technology was advancing at a rapid pace, and the world was preparing for the end of an era. All of these developments formed the backdrop against which the 1988 Jefferson nickel was minted, making it a coin that connects us directly to that dynamic moment in time. From a numismatic perspective, the 1988 Jefferson nickel was minted at three major facilities: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. Philadelphia produced coins without a mint mark. Denver coins bore the D mint mark, and San Francisco struck proof coins carrying the S mint mark, Proof coins in 1988 were carefully made with polished dies and special planchets, creating sharp mirror-like surfaces that appealed to collectors, while circulation strikes from Philadelphia and Denver were produced in the hundreds of millions to meet the needs of daily commerce. The Philadelphia Mint alone produced over 600 million pieces, while Denver struck more than 700 million, ensuring that the 1988 nickel was widely available across the nation. The composition of the Jefferson nickel had remained unchanged since 1946. After the end of the wartime silver alloy nickels, the 1988 coin was struck in the traditional copper-nickel alloy, 75% copper and 25% nickel, with a diameter of 21.2 millimeters and a weight of 5 grams. This alloy gave the coin its distinctive silvery appearance and durability. The edge of the coin was plain and smooth, maintaining consistency with earlier issues. Examining the design, the obverse still bore Felix Schlag's left-facing portrait of Jefferson, which had been in use since 1938, although minor modifications had been made over the years to improve sharpness and detail. In 1988, Jefferson's portrait remained a dignified and iconic representation of the founding father, with the inscriptions, "In God we trust liberty," and the date. The reverse continued to showcase Monticello Jefferson's neoclassical home, with the inscriptions E pluribus unum, Monticello 5 cents and United States of America. This design remained a cornerstone of American coinage until its revision in 2004. Collectors of the 1988 Jefferson nickel often focus on identifying minting varieties, errors, and high-grade specimens. Coins from Denver and Philadelphia can be found in circulated and uncirculated condition, with brilliant uncirculated examples commanding a premium, especially in higher grades. Proof coins from San Francisco are prized for their beauty and craftsmanship, with cameo and deep cameo designations. Adding further desirability, numismatists also look for die varieties, such as repunched mint marks, doubled dies, or unusual striking errors, which can dramatically increase a coin's value. Beyond the minting details, the 1988 nickel tells us about the everyday use of coins in American life. During this period, cash transactions were still dominant. Credit cards were expanding, but the nickel remained essential in vending machines, pay phones, parking meters, and countless small purchases. The durability and abundance of the Jefferson nickel made it a cornerstone of daily commerce, and the 1988 issue reflects that reality. Every worn piece today carries the marks of pockets, purses, machines, and hands that passed it along in the busy economy of the late 1980s. From a cultural standpoint, the Jefferson nickel also represented continuity. At a time when many aspects of American society were changing rapidly, the coin remained a steady presence. Its design connected generations and reminded people of Jefferson's legacy as a statesman, architect, and visionary. The coin linked past and present, showing how history can live on in the smallest objects, in terms of condition, rarity, and value. The 1988 Jefferson nickel is generally considered common in circulated grades, given the enormous mintages. But finding coins in perfect mint state condition, especially at the highest grading levels, can be challenging. For proof coins, collectors seek those with flawless mirrored surfaces and deep cameo, contrast between the frosted design elements and the shiny fields. While not a rare coin in the traditional sense, the 1988 nickel remains a vital piece in completing a Jefferson nickel collection, and serves as a reminder of the long-running design. Before its eventual modification, to create a 2-hour exploration of this coin, we would dive into the broader history of the Jefferson nickel, from its 1938 origins to its modern modifications. We would trace the career of Felix Schlag and examine how his design reflected American ideals. We would explore minting technology in the 1980s, from the creation of planchets to striking and quality control. We would look at the role of the mint itself and the vast numbers of coins it produced. We would connect the 1988 nickel to the politics, culture, and economy of that year, And finally, we would analyze its place in numismatics today, from error collecting to grading and market trends. The 1988 Jefferson nickel is more than a small piece of metal. It is a time capsule. It tells the story of a nation in transition, honoring a founding father while circulating in a modern America, poised on the edge of technological revolution and global change, every detail from its composition to its mint mark speaks of heritage and continuity, and as we look closely at this coin, we uncover a world of history, artistry, and human endeavor, all packed into a 5-gram piece of American coinage. Imagine holding in your hand a small 5-cent piece that looks ordinary to many, but for those who truly know coins, the Jefferson nickel of 1952 is far from just another pocket change item. It is a piece of American history that carries the weight of an era shaped by post-war recovery, political change, and economic growth. And in this journey, we will uncover the full story of the 1952 Jefferson nickel, from its design origins to the history of the minting process, to the role it played in commerce, to the varieties and mint marks that make it highly collectible, and we will dive deep into its significance to collectors, historians, and everyday Americans who used this coin in their daily lives, because behind the shine of every nickel lies the story of a nation in motion. The Jefferson nickel itself began its life in 1938, when the United States Mint sought to replace the Buffalo nickel that had been circulating since 1913. The winning design came from Felix Schlag, a German-born American sculptor whose vision of Thomas Jefferson on the obverse and Monticello on the reverse became iconic over the years. This design endured through World War II, when nickels temporarily shed their nickel content and were struck in an alloy of silver, manganese, and copper to save the critical metal for the war effort by 1946. However, the wartime alloys were retired, and the nickel returned to its traditional 75% copper and 25% nickel composition. And it was in this post-war world that the 1952 Jefferson nickel was struck, a time when America was asserting its global leadership and domestic life was expanding with suburban growth, consumer goods, and the optimism of the baby boom. The 1952 Jefferson nickel was struck at 3 mints: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. The Philadelphia Mint produced the largest quantity with no mint mark, while Denver used the D mint mark and San Francisco the S mint mark. This would actually be one of the last years for San Francisco Jefferson nickels, as the Mint stopped producing them in 1954, making those San Francisco nickels from the early 50s particularly notable in the long series of Jefferson nickels. Each Mint location tells its own story of production, quality, die preparation, and striking details. Collectors today examine these variations to better understand the minting process and to assess rarity and value. On the obverse side, Jefferson's portrait remained largely unchanged from the original Schlag design, though the Mint made adjustments over the years to improve clarity and striking sharpness in 1952. The coins were still known for having soft strikes, especially on the steps of Monticello, which became an important detail for collectors. The full-step designation indicates sharpness in the reverse strike, and full-step examples of 1952 nickels, especially from certain mints, are considered significantly more desirable and valuable than typical circulated examples. The 1952 nickel was part of everyday circulation at a time when a nickel had meaningful buying power. It could purchase a candy bar, a soda, or pay part of a bus fare, and these coins passed through countless hands in a decade when the Cold War was intensifying. Dwight D. Eisenhower had just been elected president, and the Korean War was coming to an end. American families were buying their first televisions, cars, and homes, and through all of this, the Jefferson nickel remained a familiar constant, a coin that was not flashy, but stable and trustworthy, just as Jefferson himself symbolized stability and intellectual grounding in the nation's identity. For collectors, the 1952 Jefferson nickel presents several points of interest. Circulation strikes are plentiful, but finding them in higher mint state grades with sharp details is challenging. The San Francisco issues are lower in mintage compared to Philadelphia and Denver, and thus more prized proof coins were also produced in Philadelphia, and these 1952 proofs are a fascinating study in their own right. The quality of the strike, the mirror finish, and the careful handling of proof sets makes them distinct in the eyes of numismatists. Errors and varieties also play a role in the 1952 Jefferson. Nickel story collectors have noted repunched mint marks, doubled dies, and other striking anomalies that increase value and spark excitement. When discovered, these varieties highlight the fact that minting is both a technological and human process, where imperfections create unexpected treasures. The legacy of the 1952 Jefferson nickel is not only about rarity or monetary worth, but about its place in a larger narrative. It represents a period when America was transitioning from war into peace, when coins were still primarily about function, but slowly becoming objects of collecting passion. It is a coin that links us to Thomas Jefferson, the statesman, the philosopher, the author of the Declaration of Independence, while also tying us to mid-20th century America, a land of optimism, growth, and change. When you look closely at a 1952 Jefferson nickel, you are not just seeing a 5-cent piece. You are holding a story of artistry, history, economy, and culture. It is a window into an era that can be explored for hours, from the story of Felix Schlegel and his design, to the evolution of minting practices, to the world of coin collectors who prize these coins for their beauty and history. The 1952 nickel stands as both artifact and legacy. So if you want to understand why this coin matters, if you want to know why collectors spend lifetimes searching for the perfect example, if you want to see how a simple piece of change can tell the story of an entire nation, then the 1952 Jefferson nickel is your guide, a coin that in its small size holds the weight of history and the promise of a deeper connection to the American past.